As Steve indicated, we started working on this project, or I started working on this project in this life about 5 years ago. The truth is that the city's been working on the shoreline and developing the shoreline and working on the boat harbor for the past 30 years. In 2005, we really started looking at what the financial situation is. We started outlining what the challenges were, how much money we had in the shoreline fund, how it was divided between the golf, the boat harbor, and other operations, what was subsidizing what. And we were doing this because we recognized that the channel really needed to be dredged, and we didn't have any funding for that. So we were getting our head around the challenging financial situation and the daunting money that we needed to dredge. We were also doing research of what other local marinas were doing. We visited 6 marinas in the Bay Area to look at how they operated their harbor. Was it privatized? Was it publicly owned? What were the dynamics of it? How much did they have to dredge? What were the lease rates? And what type of development surrounded that? Were there residential, office, etc.? And we realized 3 things from the results of that research. One was that there was an overcapacity of berths in the Bay Area. Most of the boat harbors had about 70% occupancy. Also, all marinas were operating at a loss, mainly due to their dredging costs. Now, in San Leandro's situation, we have to dredge 2 miles, so our dredging costs are significantly greater than the other marinas. Their largest channel that they needed to dredge was a 1/4 mile. We also realized that most shoreline development includes residential, office, restaurant, and retail commercial uses, along with public access to the shoreline, so that there were a variety of amenities at the boat harbor. In 2007, the City Council Shoreline and Marina Committee started meeting regularly to receive information. And at that point in time, we realized that it was important to kind of break the project into 2 pieces, because we were kind of running around in circles going, well, what are we going to do with the boat harbor? Well, I don't know. Can we develop it? Well, if we develop it, can we support the boat harbor? And we decided at that point in time to kind of split those discussions so that we could move forward with the question of, can we develop the shoreline, and what can we do there, and how would we go about that? Well, we, on the other hand, looked for funding, lobbied the federal government, and looked for ways to keep the boat harbor in its current condition. There were numerous studies and information that was provided to this 3-member Shoreline Marina Committee. We presented them the research of the Bay Area marinas and waterfronts. We also reviewed kind of the history, so what are the plans and the priorities? In 1992, there was a specific plan done for the marina. It included identifying 3 development sites, the former boat launch ramp site, the boat work site, and the former Blue Dolphin site for restaurants, hotels, and office. There was a 1993 charrette plan that was developed by the public that included significant development and a lock system for the area. There are also our general plan and other information that we have on our policies. We continue to provide the council information on the Shoreline Enterprise Fund, what our operating costs were, what the revenue was, etc. And we also went through a thorough review of the economic development activities that had occurred to date. There was, in 1999, the San Francisco Conference Center that was proposed for the Blue Dolphin site. There was a hotel, a Marriott hotel, proposed for the boat work site. Both of those projects fell through. Both of them actually were fully entitled, and they were unable to be funded. There were some restaurants that we talked to, and in 2003 there was a connections plan that identified infrastructure, lighting and amenities to connect what we currently have with the golf course, El Torito, and the facilities that are there. We also reviewed the environmental and regulatory constraints. We retained ESA to come in and provide us information on what kind of constraints there were and what the opportunities were. And an important information that came out of that is that they identified that the dredge material maintenance site, which is 104 acres that we use to store the dredge material while it decants and then haul it away a year or two later, that site could not actually be developed. There was much information provided about dredging, what our past dredging costs, what our current dredging costs are, and estimates for the future. The dredging issue has been very challenging because the federal government used to subsidize the dredging of the channel. The subsidies are not really available any longer. We did get an earmark and we did a partial dredge, but the city is responsible for transferring that material and disposing it, and that has increasingly become more and more expensive over the years. We looked at the studies that had been done in the past on privatization. There was a company that came in and we spoke with them, and they indicated that they would be more than happy to take over operating the harbor. They would just need to build a very large rectangular storage facility for dry dock storage, and we, the city, would need to pay for dredging the channel. They would be happy to dredge the inner harbor, and we didn't think that that was a very good option. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but we decided that we wanted to find out from the public, would the public be willing to pay for the maintenance and dredging of the boat harbor, because we know that everybody wants the boat harbor. And we discussed the criterion process for a master developer RFQ. Research was done, or community outreach was done in 2007. We had a council work session and recommended next steps to the council there. We had 2 town hall meetings in May and July of 2007. These were very well attended, and the community was asked for their ideas for funding the needed dredging and also their ideas for development. That information was then presented to the council, and next steps were recommended, and this included transitioning the boat harbor, reducing the expenses of operating the boat harbor, performing a preliminary environmental assessment, moving forward with the master developer RFQ process, and moving forward with a public opinion poll to determine the support for a revenue measure. We had another work session in March, updating them on the dredging efforts and the master developer process. So I wanted to take a minute and review the revenue feasibility study, because we continue to hear from the public that people would be willing to pay for the boat harbor. And the process that the city goes through when we're looking at if a tax measure would pass or a revenue measure would pass, is we retain a public opinion company, and in this case it was Godby Research, to perform a statistically significant poll. The school district does the same, almost all government agencies do the same, to identify whether we should move forward with the process. So that was done in November 2007, and we learned a couple things that are of interest. The majority of the voters were aware that there was a boat harbor, and we asked them how much do they use the boat harbor compared to the other amenities at the shoreline, and it was the relatively least used of those amenities, with the restaurants and the shoreline trails and walking paths being more heavily used at over 70% of the people who were polled, and the boat harbor and boat launch ramp being used 12% and 7% respectively. Another result that we learned was that keeping the boat harbor open and maintained was a relatively low priority for San Leandro voters. And this is in relation to other things. They were asked on what their priorities were, and public schools and education were important to 21%, most important to 21% of the people. 15% were concerned with growth and development, 14% public safety, and 2% boat harbor. The results ultimately indicated that the city should not move forward with placing a parcel tax measure on the ballot to fund that, because only 49% of the voters supported a $60 parcel tax to fund the dredging and maintenance of the boat harbor, and 2/3 of the majority is required. If you'd like more information on this public opinion poll, that address there at the bottom is actually the web address for all information on the shoreline. You can find information on the shoreline committee meetings, the Citizens Advisory Committee, and most of the studies that we did. In 2008, we went forward with the request for qualifications process and selected a master developer. We selected Cal Coast Development, who had worked on a similar-ish project down in San Pedro. They developed a hotel, conference center, offices, restaurants, and a aquarium nearby, and it was nearby, also near a Boy Scout camp on the coast with a harbor that had 1,000 slips. Their term was initially 18 months with an 18-month extension, which we have exercised. They did provide us some deposits. They were required to do certain studies like financial feasibility, soils, and designs. And the city and Cal Coast agreed to split the costs and work cooperatively on the traffic, hydrology, and tidal action studies. The study that we're talking about tonight, the alternatives for the boat harbor basin, is one of those studies that we agreed to split the costs on. We retain ownership of the site, and we've been very clear throughout the process that the city owns 1,800 acres of the shoreline area, and there is not any intention of selling that land. And we required that the developer actively participate with the community and work with the Citizens Advisory Committee. And all through this process, we have identified to the developer, the community, that this project needs to be fiscally neutral with respect to the general fund, because the general fund does not have any money to support it. Right after that, in December 2008, our Shoreline Citizens Advisory Committee began meeting, and there have been 13 meetings to date. These meetings are all open to the public. They're held at the Marina Inn, and we've had a very committed group of committee members. Kent Myers, the chairperson, and Peggy Hine-Combs, the vice chair, are both here this evening, as well as numerous other members. We had one person drop out of the CAC because they went away to college, because we have 3 youth representatives. But these people have been very dedicated and taken a lot of their time to become experts, and they've provided excellent input to us. I think that they've represented the city well. They're from all the districts in the city, people representing families, people who are new to the area, people who have been here a long time. We have stakeholders with union groups, with environmentalists, we have boaters, people who use the boat launch ramp, etc.